Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had worked many unusual cases during her 20 years with the Metropolitan Police, but she never imagined she would be standing in the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace at 3 in the morning. The call had come in just after midnight, urgent and cryptic. A suspicious item had been discovered, and the Royal Protection Squad needed an experienced investigator immediately. Sarah walked through the ornate hallways, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors. The palace felt different at night, almost ghostly. The usual bustle of staff and visitors was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the distant ticking of antique clocks. She had been to the palace twice before for security briefings, but never under such mysterious circumstances. Captain James Reynolds of the Royal Protection Squad met her at the entrance to the private wing. His face was stern, and worry lines creased his forehead. James had been protecting the royal family for 15 years, and Sarah had never seen him look so troubled. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Inspector," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have a delicate situation that requires your expertise." Sarah nodded, adjusting her notepad and pen. "What exactly are we dealing with, Captain?" James glanced around nervously before leading her down a quieter corridor. "This evening, during a routine security check of personal belongings, we discovered something concerning in Queen Camilla's handbag. The item in question has raised serious questions about security protocols and potential threats." The weight of his words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. Any investigation involving the royal family was sensitive, but this seemed particularly grave. "What kind of item are we talking about?" "A small electronic device," James replied, stopping outside an ornate door. "Our technical team has examined it briefly, but we need a thorough criminal investigation to determine its origin and purpose." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Electronic devices found in unexpected places often meant surveillance equipment, tracking devices, or worse. "Has Queen Camilla been informed about the discovery?" James shook his head. "Not yet. We wanted to conduct a preliminary investigation first. The fewer people who know about this initially, the better we can control the situation." They entered a small office that had been converted into a temporary command center. Several serious-looking men in dark suits stood around a table where a clear evidence bag sat under bright lights. Inside the bag, Sarah could see a tiny black device no larger than a button. "This is Chief Technology Officer Martin Webb." James introduced a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. "He's our electronics specialist." Martin stepped forward, pointing to the device. "Inspector, this appears to be a sophisticated listening device. It's incredibly small and advanced, much more complex than anything commercially available. The craftsmanship suggests professional intelligence-grade equipment." Sarah leaned closer to examine the device through the evidence bag. "How was it discovered?" "During the evening security sweep," James explained. "We conduct routine checks of all personal items before they're returned to private quarters. Officer Collins noticed something unusual about the weight and structure of the Queen's handbag." A young officer standing nearby nodded. "I've been doing these checks for 3 years, Inspector. I know how personal items should feel and look. This bag felt different, heavier in one spot. When I investigated further, I found this device sewn into the lining." Sarah's mind began racing through possibilities. Sewn into the lining suggests someone with access and time. This wasn't planted quickly or carelessly. "Exactly our concern," James agreed. "This required someone who could access the Queen's personal belongings for an extended period without raising suspicion." The implications were staggering. If someone had been listening to Queen Camilla's private conversations, they could have gathered sensitive information about the royal family, government matters, or personal details that could be used for blackmail or other malicious purposes. "How long might this device have been in place?" Sarah asked Martin. "Based on the battery technology, it could have been operational for several weeks, possibly months," Martin replied grimly. "The placement is professional, designed to be undetectable during normal use." Sarah walked around the table, studying the evidence from different angles. "Who has regular access to Queen Camilla's personal belongings?" James consulted a folder. "Her personal assistant, Rebecca Thompson, who has worked for the family for 8 years. The housekeeping staff led by Mrs. Elizabeth Crawford, who has been with the palace for 12 years. And occasionally security personnel during transport and official events. Each name would need to be investigated thoroughly." Sarah knew that betrayal from within was often the most difficult to detect. and the most damaging when discovered. I'll need complete background checks on everyone with access, Sarah said. Financial records, personal associations, travel history, anything that might indicate motive or opportunity. Already being prepared, James assured her. But Inspector, we need to handle this with extreme discretion. If word of this investigation leaks, it could cause a significant scandal. Sarah understood the delicate balance required. The investigation needed to be thorough but quiet, efficient but careful. One wrong move could damage the reputation of innocent people or, worse, compromise the safety of the royal family. What's our timeline? She asked. We need answers quickly, James replied. Queen Camilla has several important engagements this week, including meetings with foreign dignitaries. If there's a security breach, we need to know immediately. Sarah nodded, already formulating her investigation plan. I'll need to interview everyone with access, examine all security footage from the past month, and coordinate with technical experts to trace the device's origin. As she spoke, the gravity of the situation became clearer. Someone had violated the most secure location in Britain and potentially compromised the safety and privacy of the royal family. The investigation would require her to navigate palace politics, long-standing loyalties, and the complex web of relationships that existed within the royal household. Captain Reynolds, Sarah said finally, I'll need a private space to conduct interviews and access to all relevant personnel files. This investigation starts now, James nodded solemnly. Whatever you need, Inspector. The safety and security of the royal family depends on finding answers quickly. As Sarah prepared to begin one of the most sensitive investigations of her career, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case would challenge everything she thought she knew about loyalty, trust, and the hidden dangers that existed even in the most protected places in the world. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the palace conference room as Sarah began her first round of interviews. She had spent the early hours reviewing personnel files and security footage, looking for any unusual patterns or behaviors. Now came the delicate task of questioning people who had dedicated their lives to serving the royal family. Rebecca Thompson sat across from Sarah, her hands folded neatly in her lap. As Queen Camilla's personal assistant, Rebecca had perhaps the most intimate access to her belongings. She was a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and an impeccable reputation. But Sarah knew that even the most trusted people could harbor secrets. Miss Thompson, Sarah began gently, I need to ask you about your daily routine with Queen Camilla's personal items. Rebecca nodded, though her nervousness was evident. I help organize her schedule, prepare her belongings for engagements, and ensure everything is in order for her daily activities. I handle her handbags, jewelry, and personal documents regularly. When was the last time you handled the specific handbag in question? Yesterday morning, Rebecca replied without hesitation. I was preparing her items for the charity luncheon. I remember placing her reading glasses and some personal notes inside. Sarah made careful notes. Did you notice anything unusual about the bag? Any changes in weight or structure? Rebecca frowned thoughtfully. Now that you mention it, there was something. When I picked it up, it seemed slightly heavier than usual. But I assumed it was because of the additional items the Queen had requested for the event. This was interesting. Sarah leaned forward slightly. What additional items? Some documents related to her patronage work, her personal phone, and a small gift for the charity organizer, Rebecca explained. Nothing out of the ordinary, but more than she usually carries. Sarah continued her questioning, probing gently about Rebecca's financial situation, personal relationships, and any recent changes in her life. Nothing immediately stood out as suspicious, but Sarah made note of everything for further investigation. Next, she interviewed Mrs. Elizabeth Crawford, the head housekeeper. Mrs. Crawford was a formidable woman in her 60s who had worked at the palace longer than anyone else on the suspect list. Her loyalty to the royal family was legendary, but Sarah knew that long service could sometimes breed resentment or create opportunities for exploitation. Mrs. Crawford, Sarah began, as head housekeeper, you oversee the cleaning and maintenance of Queen Camilla's private quarters. That's correct, Mrs. Crawford replied with crisp efficiency. My team and I ensure that all royal residences are maintained to the highest standards. How often do you or your staff have access to personal belongings? We follow strict protocols, Mrs. Crawford assured her. Personal items are never moved or handled unless absolutely necessary, and always under supervision. We respect the privacy of the royal family completely. Despite her professional demeanor, Sarah detected a slight defensiveness in Mrs. Crawford's tone. Have you noticed any changes in your staff recently? Anyone acting differently or showing unusual interest in personal belongings? Mrs. Crawford paused, and Sarah sensed internal conflict. There is one matter that has concerned me recently. Sarah's attention sharpened. Please continue. One of the newer housekeeping staff, Maria Santos, has been asking questions about security procedures and access protocols. I found it odd because these details aren't relevant to her cleaning duties. This was the first potential lead. Sarah made detailed notes about Maria Santos, requesting her full employment history and background information. As the interviews continued throughout the day, Sarah spoke with security officers, maintenance staff, and other palace employees who might have had access to Queen Camilla's belongings. Each conversation revealed small details that, when pieced together, began to form a picture of the palace's complex social dynamics. During a break between interviews, Captain Reynolds approached Sarah with updates from the technical investigation. Inspector, Martin has made some progress analyzing the device. They walked to the technical analysis room, where Martin Webb was hunched over sophisticated equipment, examining the tiny listening device under powerful magnification. What have you discovered? Sarah asked. Martin looked up, his expression grave. This device is definitely professional grade, but here's what's interesting. It contains components that are traceable. The microprocessor has a unique serial number that we can trace back to the manufacturer. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Can you identify where it was purchased? That's the complex part, Martin continued. These components are typically sold only to government agencies or licensed private security firms. The fact that someone obtained this technology suggests either insider access to legitimate channels or connections to black market suppliers. This information significantly narrowed the field of suspects. Sarah realized they were likely dealing with someone with professional connections to the security or intelligence community. There's more, Martin added. The device has been modified with custom software. Whoever installed this had specific technical knowledge and probably specialized training. Sarah thanked Martin and returned to her interviews with this new information. The afternoon brought meetings with several security personnel, including some who had previously worked for private security firms before joining the Royal Protection Squad. Officer David Park, a relatively new addition to the security team, seemed particularly nervous during his interview. He had worked for a private security company that specialized in surveillance equipment before joining the palace staff 6 months ago. Officer Park, Sarah began, tell me about your previous work experience. David shifted uncomfortably. I worked for Secure Tech Solutions for 3 years before coming here. We specialized in security systems and surveillance equipment for corporate clients. What type of surveillance equipment? Various types. Cameras, listening devices, tracking systems. It was legitimate work for businesses protecting their assets and employees. Sarah made note of the company name for further investigation. Do you still have contacts in that industry? David hesitated. Some former colleagues, yes, but I haven't been in touch with them since starting here. The hesitation raised Sarah's suspicions. She probed deeper about his financial situation, personal relationships, and reasons for leaving his previous job. David claimed he left for better job security and the honor of serving the royal family, but something in his manner suggested there might be more to the story. As evening approached, Sarah reviewed her notes and the growing pile of information. Several concerning patterns were emerging. Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had been asking unusual questions about security protocols, had significant financial pressures due to family medical bills. David Park, the former surveillance specialist, had left his previous job under circumstances that warranted further investigation. Captain Reynolds joined Sarah for a briefing as the palace prepared for the evening activities. What's your assessment so far, Inspector? He asked. Sarah organized her thoughts carefully. We have several persons of interest, each with different potential motives and opportunities. Maria Santos has financial pressures and has been asking inappropriate questions about security. David Park has the technical knowledge to install such a device and connections to the surveillance industry. What about Rebecca Thompson and Mrs. Crawford? Less likely based on current evidence, but I'm not ruling anyone out yet, Sarah replied. Tomorrow I need to conduct deeper background investigations and coordinate with external agencies to trace the device's components. As they spoke, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The sophistication of the operation suggested careful planning and significant resources. This wasn't the work of someone acting alone out of desperation or opportunism. "Captain, I think we're dealing with something larger than a simple case of theft or personal betrayal," Sarah said. "The professionalism of this operation suggests organized involvement, possibly with connections outside the palace." Reynolds nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of. If this is part of a larger intelligence operation, the implications for royal security are enormous." Sarah knew that the next phase of the investigation would require expanding beyond the palace walls to trace the device's origin and uncover the broader network behind this sophisticated surveillance operation. The next morning brought disturbing news that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Sarah arrived at the palace to find Captain Reynolds waiting with a grim expression and a sealed envelope marked with the highest security classification. "Inspector, we received this overnight through secure channels," Reynolds said, handing her the envelope. "It's from MI5. Sarah opened the envelope carefully and read the contents twice before the full implications sank in. The surveillance device found in Queen Camilla's handbag was identical to equipment used in a recent espionage case involving foreign intelligence services. MI5 had been tracking the distribution of these devices for months as part of a larger investigation into international surveillance operations, targeting British government officials. "This changes everything," Sarah said, looking up from the document. "We're not dealing with a disgruntled employee or opportunistic criminal. This is part of a sophisticated intelligence operation." Reynolds nodded solemnly. "MI5 is sending Agent Patricia Wells to coordinate with us. She's their specialist in foreign surveillance operations." Within an hour, Agent Wells arrived at the palace. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an efficient manner and an air of authority that came from years of dealing with international espionage cases. "Inspector Mitchell," Agent Wells began without preamble. "This device is part of a series of surveillance operations we've been tracking. Similar equipment has been found targeting government ministers, military officials, and now apparently the royal family." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. "What do we know about who's behind this?" "We have evidence suggesting connections to a foreign intelligence service, but proving direct involvement is complex," Wells explained. "These operations use local assets and intermediaries to maintain plausible deniability." This information cast Sarah's previous interviews in a new light. The palace employees she had questioned might be innocent victims themselves, or they could be unwitting accomplices in a larger scheme. "Agent Wells, I need to share our findings about potential inside involvement," Sarah said, pulling out her notes. "We have several persons of interest among the palace staff." Wells reviewed Sarah's investigation notes with professional interest. "Your instincts about this being more than an inside job were correct. However, these operations typically require someone with legitimate access to plant the devices." They decided to focus their immediate attention on David Park, the former surveillance specialist, and Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had been asking unusual questions. Both would be brought in for more detailed questioning under the new understanding of the case's scope. The interview room had been reconfigured with additional security measures for the enhanced interrogation. David Park sat across from Sarah and Agent Wells, his nervousness now clearly evident as he realized the serious nature of the investigation. "Officer Park," Sarah began, "we've discovered that the device found in Queen Camilla's handbag is part of a larger surveillance operation targeting British officials. I need you to tell us about any contacts you've had with foreign nationals or unusual requests for information about palace security." David's face went pale. "I don't understand. I've never been involved in anything like that." Agent Wells leaned forward. "David, we're not accusing you of deliberate espionage, but these operations often use people without their full knowledge. Have you been approached by anyone asking about your work or offering opportunities that seemed too good to be true?" David was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal decision. Finally, he spoke. "There was something, but I didn't think it was important." Sarah and Wells exchanged glances. "Tell us about it." "About 2 months ago, I was contacted by someone claiming to be a recruiter for a private security firm. They said they were impressed with my background and wanted to offer me a consulting position. The money was very good, much more than my palace salary." "What did this consulting work involve?" Wells asked. They said they needed information about palace security procedures for a client who was developing a security system for another government building. They claimed it was all legitimate, just background research. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Did you provide any information? David nodded reluctantly. Just general information about access protocols and security procedures. Nothing classified or specific to any individual. I thought it was legitimate business research. Wells made detailed notes about the contact, including phone numbers, email addresses, and meeting locations. This information would be crucial for tracing the operation back to its source. David, Sarah said gently, I need you to understand how serious this is. You may have been manipulated into providing information that was used to compromise royal security. The weight of realization hit David hard. I never meant for anything like this to happen. I thought I was just helping with legitimate security research. The interview continued for another hour, with David providing every detail he could remember about his contacts with the supposed security consultants. Agent Wells immediately began coordinating with her MI5 colleagues to trace the individuals and organizations involved. Next, they brought in Maria Santos for questioning. Maria was a small, nervous woman in her 30s who had been working at the palace for only 8 months. Her background check had revealed significant financial pressures due to her mother's expensive medical treatment. Maria, Sarah began in Spanish. Having learned that Maria was more comfortable in her native language, we need to ask you about some questions you've been asking about palace security procedures. Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately. I know I shouldn't have asked those questions. Mrs. Crawford was right to be concerned. Agent Wells spoke in careful Spanish. Maria, we're not here to get you in trouble. We think someone may have asked you to gather information, and we need to know who. Through her tears, Maria began to tell a story that paralleled David's experience. She had been approached by someone claiming to work for an immigration assistance organization. They offered to help expedite her mother's visa application and provide financial assistance for medical bills in exchange for simple information about her workplace. They said they just needed to know about the building layout and daily routines for insurance purposes, Maria explained. They claimed they were helping other employees at important buildings get better insurance coverage. Sarah felt anger building at how these vulnerable people had been exploited. The operation had been carefully designed to target individuals with financial pressures or career ambitions, using their legitimate needs to manipulate them into providing information. Maria, did you ever see the specific handbag that belonged to Queen Camilla? Wells asked. Maria nodded. I clean her private quarters twice a week. I always see her personal items, but I never touch them unless Mrs. Crawford specifically instructs me to move something for cleaning purposes. Have you ever been alone in Queen Camilla's quarters? Sometimes for a few minutes while I'm cleaning. But there are always security cameras, and I know I'm being monitored. This information was crucial. The device had been sewn into the handbag's lining, which would have required time and privacy. If Maria had only brief monitored access, she couldn't have installed the device herself. As the interviews concluded, Sarah and Agent Wells compiled their findings. Both David and Maria appeared to be unwitting accomplices who had been manipulated into providing information that enabled the surveillance operation. However, the actual installation of the device required someone with different access and technical skills. We're missing a piece, Sarah told Wells as they reviewed the evidence. Someone else had to physically install the device. Someone with both access and technical knowledge who hasn't appeared in our investigation yet. Wells agreed. These operations often use multiple layers of assets. David and Maria provided information, but someone else was responsible for the technical execution. As evening approached, Sarah realized they needed to expand their investigation to include palace staff who might not have been on their initial suspect list. The operation was more sophisticated than they had initially understood, and the real perpetrator was still hidden among the palace's extensive staff. Captain Reynolds joined them for a late evening briefing, bringing news that would complicate the investigation further. Inspector, Agent Wells, Reynolds said grimly, we've discovered something else. The device wasn't the only security breach. Our comprehensive sweep has revealed 2 additional surveillance devices in other locations within the palace. The scope of the operation was much larger than anyone had imagined, and Sarah knew that finding the truth would require investigating people and possibilities they hadn't yet considered. The discovery of additional surveillance devices sent shockwaves through the palace security team. Sarah stood in the secure briefing room studying photographs of 3 different listening devices, each one professionally installed in locations that would capture sensitive conversations. One had been found in a decorative lamp in the private dining room, another hidden inside a picture frame in the library where private meetings often took place. "The sophistication of these installations is remarkable," said Martin Webb, the technical specialist, pointing to detailed photographs of each device. "Each one is perfectly concealed and positioned for optimal audio capture. This level of placement requires intimate knowledge of the palace layout and daily routines." Agent Wells studied the photographs with growing concern. "Inspector, we're looking at a comprehensive surveillance operation that has been running for months, possibly longer. The amount of sensitive information that could have been gathered is enormous." Sarah felt the pressure of the investigation intensifying. How many people would have the access and knowledge necessary to install devices in all these locations? Captain Reynolds consulted his security files. The dining room and library are accessed by housekeeping staff, maintenance workers, security personnel, and various support staff. We're talking about potentially dozens of people who could have had opportunity. The expansion of possible suspects made the investigation exponentially more complex. Sarah realized they needed a different approach to identify the real perpetrator among so many possibilities. "Agent Wells," Sarah said, "your experience with foreign intelligence operations, how do they typically recruit and manage assets in high-security environments?" Wells leaned back in her chair, drawing on years of counterintelligence experience. "They often use what we call a handler, someone who coordinates multiple assets and manages the technical aspects of the operation. This person would have legitimate access, technical skills, and the ability to move around without suspicion." This insight shifted Sarah's thinking. Instead of looking for someone who could access all the locations, they should be looking for someone who could coordinate and oversee the entire operation from within the palace structure. "Captain Reynolds," Sarah said, "I need a list of all palace staff who have both technical training and broad access to different areas of the palace." Reynolds immediately began compiling the information, and within an hour, they had a much shorter list of potential suspects. The list included senior maintenance personnel, experienced security officers, and certain administrative staff with building management responsibilities. One name stood out immediately: Thomas Morrison, the assistant facilities manager. Morrison had worked at the palace for 5 years, had extensive technical training from his military background, and had legitimate access to virtually every area of the palace for maintenance and facility management purposes. Thomas Morrison, Reynolds read from his file, age 38, former Royal Engineers officer, exemplary service record, responsible for coordinating maintenance activities throughout the palace complex. Sarah studied Morrison's photograph and background information. His military engineering background would certainly provide the technical skills necessary for installing sophisticated surveillance equipment, and his position gave him perfect cover for accessing any location within the palace. "What do we know about his personal circumstances?" Agent Wells asked. Reynolds flipped through the file. "Recently divorced, significant legal fees from custody proceedings, some financial stress according to his credit checks. He's also scheduled for a performance review next month. The financial pressure provided potential motive, and his pending performance review could create additional stress that foreign operatives might exploit." Sarah decided Morrison needed immediate investigation. "I want complete surveillance on Morrison starting now," Sarah told Reynolds. "Phone records, financial transactions, travel history, and discreet observation of his daily activities." While surveillance was being arranged, Sarah decided to approach Morrison indirectly by interviewing his colleagues and subordinates. She started with Jenny Walsh, a junior facilities coordinator who worked closely with Morrison on daily maintenance operations. "Ms. Walsh," Sarah began in a casual tone, "tell me about working with Mr. Morrison. How would you describe his management style?" Jenny seemed comfortable discussing her supervisor. "Thomas is very detail-oriented and professional. He knows every inch of this building and takes his responsibilities seriously. Has he seemed different lately? Any changes in behavior or unusual activities?" Jenny paused thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, he has been working more evening shifts recently. He said it was because some maintenance work is easier to do when the palace is quieter, but it seemed like more than usual." This information was significant. Evening shifts would provide perfect opportunities for installing surveillance devices without being observed by the regular daytime staff. Did he ever ask you to handle his regular duties while he worked on special projects? A few times, Jenny confirmed. He said he was working on upgrading some of the electrical systems and needed to do detailed inspections of various rooms. Sarah made careful notes while maintaining a casual tone. Did he ever mention these upgrades specifically? Which rooms or systems he was working on? He mentioned the dining room electrical outlets and something about updating the wiring in the library. He also did some work in Queen Camilla's private quarters area, but that was coordinated with security as usual. Each location Jenny mentioned corresponded exactly to where surveillance devices had been discovered. Sarah felt confident they were closing in on their primary suspect. The next interview was with Robert Chen, the senior maintenance supervisor who oversaw Morrison's work. Chen had been with the palace for 12 years and knew the facility management operations intimately. Mr. Chen, Sarah began, I'm reviewing facility management procedures as part of a security assessment. Tell me about Thomas Morrison's recent project work. Chen frowned slightly. Thomas has been taking on more independent projects lately. He requested permission to work outside normal hours on electrical system evaluations. Did you supervise these projects directly? Not entirely, Chen admitted. Thomas has excellent technical credentials, and I trusted him to handle the assessments independently. He provided written reports, but I didn't observe the actual work. This lack of direct supervision would have given Morrison perfect freedom to install surveillance devices while appearing to conduct legitimate maintenance work. Mr. Chen, in your professional opinion, would Thomas have the technical skills to install sophisticated electronic equipment? Absolutely, Chen replied without hesitation. His military engineering background includes extensive electronics training. He's probably the most technically capable person on our facilities team. Sarah thanked Chen and moved on to her next interview, feeling increasingly confident that Morrison was their target. However, she needed concrete evidence before making any accusations. Agent Wells approached Sarah with updates from the MI5 investigation. Inspector, we've made progress tracing the surveillance equipment. The devices were purchased through a series of shell companies, but we've identified a pattern of financial transactions that suggest coordination with foreign intelligence services. Can you connect any of these transactions to palace personnel? We're working on it, Wells replied. But these operations typically use intermediaries and cash payments to avoid direct financial connections. As evening approached, Sarah received a report from the surveillance team monitoring Morrison. He had left work at his normal time, but instead of going home, he had driven to a location in central London where he met with an unidentified individual for approximately 30 minutes. Captain Reynolds, Sarah said, I think we have enough evidence to bring Morrison in for questioning, but I want to coordinate with Agent Wells to ensure we don't compromise the larger MI5 investigation. Wells agreed with the approach. We need to be careful how we handle this. If Morrison is working for foreign intelligence, his arrest could trigger other operatives to disappear before we can identify them. Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate balance required. They needed to get Morrison to reveal information about his handlers and the broader network while ensuring that Queen Camilla and the royal family remained protected from further surveillance. As they prepared for what could be the crucial phase of the investigation, Sarah reflected on how the case had evolved from a simple security breach to a complex international espionage operation. The next 24 hours would determine whether they could unravel the entire network, or if key operatives would escape to continue their surveillance activities elsewhere. The surveillance team's report on Thomas Morrison's evening meeting provided the breakthrough Sarah had been waiting for. The unidentified individual Morrison met with had been photographed and, within hours, Agent Wells had identified him through MI5's facial recognition database. His name is Victor Petrov, Wells informed Sarah and Captain Reynolds during an emergency briefing. He's a known operative working for foreign intelligence services, specifically focusing on electronic surveillance operations in Western Europe. Sarah studied Petrov's photograph and background file. The man appeared to be in his 40s, well-dressed, and completely unremarkable, exactly the type of person who could blend into any environment without drawing attention. What do we know about his activities in London? Sarah asked. He's been in the country for 6 months on a business visa, claiming to work for a technology consulting firm, Wells explained. We've been tracking him as part of our broader investigation, but this is the first direct connection we've established to the palace surveillance operation. The evidence was building into a clear picture. Morrison, under financial pressure and with perfect access to the palace, had been recruited by Petrov to install surveillance devices throughout the royal residence. The operation had been running for months, gathering sensitive information about the royal family's private conversations and activities. Captain Reynolds, Sarah said, "We need to arrest Morrison tonight, but we have to do it carefully. If Petrov realizes his asset has been compromised, he'll likely disappear immediately." Reynolds nodded grimly. "How do you want to handle this?" Agent Wells had already been coordinating with her MI5 colleagues. "We're going to conduct simultaneous operations. While you arrest Morrison, we'll take Petrov into custody. The timing has to be perfect to prevent either one from warning the other." Sarah felt the familiar pre-arrest tension that came with high-stakes operations. "What's our timeline?" "Morrison is scheduled to work a late shift tonight starting at 10 p.m., Reynolds reported. "He'll be alone in the palace facilities areas for most of his shift." "Perfect," Wells said. "Petrov is staying at a hotel in central London. We'll coordinate the arrest for 11 p.m., when Morrison will be well into his shift and Petrov will likely be in his room." The next few hours were spent finalizing the operation details. Sarah would lead the Morrison arrest with support from palace security, while Wells would coordinate the Petrov operation with her MI5 team. Both arrests needed to be conducted quietly to avoid alerting any other potential operatives. At 10:45 p.m., Sarah positioned herself and her team near the palace maintenance areas. Morrison had arrived for his shift as scheduled and was currently working in the basement electrical systems area, unaware that his surveillance operation had been discovered. Through her radio earpiece, Sarah heard Agent Wells confirm that her team was in position outside Petrov's hotel. "All units ready," Wells reported. "Commencing operation in 60 seconds." Sarah watched through a security monitor as Morrison worked alone in the maintenance tunnel, checking electrical panels with professional efficiency. In a few minutes, she would confront him with evidence of his espionage activities and attempt to get him to provide information about the broader operation. "Go," Wells announced through the radio. Sarah and her team moved swiftly through the palace corridors toward Morrison's location. They found him exactly where the security monitors indicated, kneeling beside an electrical panel with his back to the entrance. "Thomas Morrison," Sarah called out clearly. "Metropolitan Police, you're under arrest." Morrison froze for a moment before slowly turning around. His face showed surprise but not shock, and Sarah realized he had probably been expecting this moment for some time. "Inspector," Morrison said calmly, closing his toolkit. "I suppose you found the devices." Sarah was surprised by his immediate acknowledgement. "Mr. Morrison, you're under arrest on suspicion of espionage and violations of the Official Secrets Act. You have the right to remain silent." As Captain Reynolds placed Morrison in handcuffs, Sarah continued the formal arrest procedure while studying Morrison's demeanor. He seemed resigned rather than defiant, which suggested he might be willing to cooperate with the investigation. Through her earpiece, Agent Wells reported success. "Petrov is in custody. He attempted to destroy some electronic equipment, but we were able to secure most of his materials." Morrison looked up at this news, and Sarah saw something like relief in his expression. "Victor's been arrested too?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Mr. Morrison, you're going to have an opportunity to tell us about your involvement in this operation. Your cooperation could significantly affect how this case proceeds." They transported Morrison to a secure interview facility within the palace complex, where Sarah and Agent Wells would conduct a detailed interrogation. The room was equipped with recording equipment and designed for sensitive security interviews. Morrison sat across from Sarah and Wells, his lawyer having arrived quickly after his arrest. The lawyer, James Patterson, was an experienced criminal defense attorney who specialized in national security cases. "My client is prepared to make a statement," Patterson announced, "but we need assurances about how his cooperation will be considered in any prosecution decisions." Agent Wells leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, the scope of your cooperation will definitely influence how we proceed. We need to understand the full extent of this operation and any other security risks." Morrison took a deep breath before beginning his confession. It started about 4 months ago. I was going through the divorce and the legal fees were destroying me financially. I was working late one evening when Victor approached me outside the palace. Sarah listened carefully as Morrison described how Petrov had gradually recruited him, starting with seemingly innocent requests for general information about palace security procedures. He said he worked for a security consulting firm that was developing proposals for government buildings. Morrison continued. The money he offered was substantial, and I convinced myself it was legitimate research. When did you realize it was espionage? Wells asked. Morrison's expression grew more troubled. When he asked me to install the first device. He claimed it was for testing security vulnerabilities, but I knew then that something was wrong. But by that point, I was in too deep financially and emotionally. How many devices did you install? 5 total, Morrison admitted. 3 that you've found and 2 others in locations I'm sure you haven't discovered yet. Sarah and Wells exchanged glances. The surveillance operation was even more extensive than they had realized. Mr. Morrison, Sarah said firmly, we need you to tell us the locations of the other devices and provide complete details about your communications with Viktor Petrov. Morrison provided detailed information about the remaining surveillance devices and described his meetings with Petrov. Over the past 4 months, the intelligence gathered could have compromised not just royal family privacy, but also government discussions that took place during official visits to the palace. Was Victor working alone, or were there other operatives involved? Wells asked. There was at least one other person, Morrison revealed. Victor mentioned a woman who was coordinating other operations, but I never met her or learned her identity. This information confirmed Wells' suspicion that the palace surveillance was part of a broader espionage network targeting multiple high-value British targets. As the interview continued into the early morning hours, Morrison provided increasingly detailed information about Petrov's methods, communication procedures, and the scope of intelligence-gathering activities. Mr. Morrison, Sarah said finally, your cooperation tonight has been significant. You've helped us understand a serious threat to national security. Morrison nodded, the weight of his actions clearly visible in his expression. I never intended for this to go so far. I just needed the money, and before I knew it, I was trapped in something I couldn't escape. Agent Wells concluded the interview with plans to use Morrison's information to identify and neutralize any remaining aspects of the espionage operation. The palace would need comprehensive security upgrades, and all personnel would require additional screening. As dawn broke over London, Sarah reflected on how a routine security check had uncovered an international espionage operation targeting the highest levels of British society. The investigation had revealed vulnerabilities that went far beyond simple palace security, exposing the sophisticated methods used by foreign intelligence services to penetrate even the most protected institutions. The interrogation of Viktor Petrov proved to be far more challenging than Thomas Morrison's cooperative confession. Agent Wells led the questioning in a secure MI5 facility, with Sarah observing through one-way glass. Petrov sat calmly across from Wells, showing none of the nervousness or guilt that Morrison had displayed. Mr. Petrov, Wells began in fluent Russian, we have substantial evidence of your involvement in espionage activities against British interests. Petrov responded in perfect English with a slight accent. I am a legitimate business consultant working in technology security. I have proper documentation for my presence in your country. Wells placed photographs of Petrov's meetings with Morrison on the table. These images show you engaging in covert communications with a palace employee who has confessed to installing surveillance equipment on your behalf. For the first time, Petrov's calm expression flickered slightly. I do not know what this person may have told you, but I have committed no crimes. Sarah watched Petrov's body language carefully, noting the professional control that suggested extensive training in resisting interrogation. Unlike Morrison, who was essentially an amateur recruited through financial pressure, Petrov was clearly an experienced intelligence operative. Wells continued the questioning for several hours, gradually revealing the extent of evidence against Petrov. The surveillance devices contained his fingerprints. Financial records showed payments to Morrison through accounts Petrov controlled, and electronic evidence from his hotel room included communication equipment used for espionage operations. During a break in the interrogation, Wells joined Sarah in the observation room. "He's a professional," Wells said with frustrated admiration. "He's not going to break easily, and he knows exactly how much we can prove versus what we suspect." Sarah studied Petrov through the one-way mirror. "What about the other operative Morrison mentioned? The woman who was supposedly coordinating other operations? That's what concerns me most," Wells replied. "If there's a broader network still operating, Petrov's arrest might prompt them to accelerate their activities or disappear entirely." Meanwhile, back at the palace, Captain Reynolds was coordinating a comprehensive security review with Sarah's team. The discovery of 5 surveillance devices had prompted a complete examination of the entire palace complex, using advanced detection equipment to locate any additional threats. "Inspector," Reynolds reported via secure phone, "we found 2 more devices in locations Morrison didn't mention. Either he was lying about the total number, or someone else has been operating independently." This news added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Sarah realized they might be dealing with multiple espionage operations running simultaneously, or Morrison might not have been told about all the surveillance activities. "Captain, I need you to expand the background investigations to include anyone who might have had access to those additional locations," Sarah instructed. "We may have missed another insider." The security sweep continued throughout the day, revealing a total of 8 surveillance devices hidden throughout the palace. The scope of the operation was staggering, providing foreign intelligence services with unprecedented access to royal family communications and British government discussions that took place during official visits. Dr. Margaret Thornton, the palace communications director, joined the investigation team to assess the potential damage from months of surveillance. She was a veteran government official who understood the implications of compromised communications in diplomatic and security contexts. "Inspector Mitchell," Dr. Thornton said gravely, "the intelligence value of what these devices could have captured is enormous. Private conversations between royal family members, discussions with government ministers, diplomatic communications with foreign leaders, all potentially compromised." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility intensifying. "Dr. Thornton, what's our assessment of the most sensitive information that might have been gathered?" Queen Camilla often discusses her charity work and social initiatives in the monitored areas, but she also receives briefings about government policies and international relations. If foreign operatives have been listening for months, they could have gathered significant intelligence about British policies and positions. The investigation team worked through the night, analyzing the surveillance equipment and attempting to determine exactly what information had been transmitted and to whom. Martin Webb, the technical specialist, provided regular updates on his analysis of the devices. "Inspector," Martin reported, "the sophistication of this equipment suggests state-level resources. These devices have been transmitting encrypted data to external receivers, but decrypting the communications will take considerable time and technical resources." Agent Wells returned from the Petrov interrogation with limited progress. He's admitted to being in London on intelligence business, but he's claiming diplomatic immunity and refusing to provide details about his handlers or other operatives. This development complicated the legal aspects of the case significantly. If Petrov could establish diplomatic status, he might be expelled from the country rather than prosecuted, potentially allowing him to escape justice. "What about the communication equipment found in his hotel room?" Sarah asked. "That's more promising," Wells replied. "We've identified encrypted communications with at least 3 other individuals, including someone using a female identity that could correspond to the woman Morrison mentioned." The technical analysis team was working to decrypt these communications, but the process would take days or weeks to complete. Meanwhile, other potential operatives remained free and possibly active. Sarah decided to return to Morrison for additional questioning, hoping that his continued cooperation might provide leads to identify remaining threats. Morrison had been transferred to a secure holding facility and appeared increasingly willing to provide information. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah began the follow-up interview, "we've discovered additional surveillance devices beyond the ones you installed. Do you have any knowledge of other people involved in similar activities?" Morrison looked genuinely surprised. "I thought I was the only palace employee involved. Victor never mentioned anyone else having access. Think carefully about your interactions with Victor. Did he ever reference other operations or mention meeting with other people? Morrison concentrated, clearly searching his memory for relevant details. There was one time when he seemed to be coordinating schedules with someone else. He received a phone call during one of our meetings and spoke in Russian about timing and locations. Did you understand any of the conversation? Only fragments, Morrison admitted. But I heard him mention the woman and something about other buildings or other targets. This confirmed that the palace surveillance was part of a broader intelligence operation. But Sarah still needed to identify who else might be involved and what other locations might be compromised. Agent Wells joined the interview with updates from the MI5 investigation. Mr. Morrison, we've analyzed Victor's communications equipment and found evidence of coordination with other operatives. We need your help identifying any palace personnel who might have been approached or recruited. Morrison provided names of colleagues who had seemed stressed or financially troubled, people who might be vulnerable to recruitment by foreign intelligence services. Each name would require investigation, but the list gave them starting points for identifying other potential security breaches. As the investigation expanded beyond the palace walls, Sarah realized they were uncovering an extensive espionage network that had been operating in London for months, possibly years. The surveillance of Queen Camilla had been just one component of a much larger intelligence-gathering operation targeting British government and royal institutions. Agent Wells, Sarah said as they concluded the interview, I think we need to consider that this goes beyond just palace security. If they've been this successful here, what other high-value targets might be compromised? Wells nodded grimly. That's exactly what we're trying to determine. The palace surveillance might have been their most ambitious operation, but it's probably not their only one. The investigation was evolving into a comprehensive counterintelligence operation that would require extensive resources and coordination between multiple agencies to fully uncover and neutralize the foreign espionage network that had penetrated some of Britain's most secure institutions. 3 weeks after the arrest of Thomas Morrison and Victor Petrov, the investigation had expanded into one of the largest counterintelligence operations in recent British history. Sarah found herself working closely with multiple government agencies as they uncovered the full scope of the foreign espionage network that had infiltrated London's most secure institutions. The breakthrough came when MI5's technical team successfully decrypted Petrov's communications, revealing contact with at least 6 other operatives working in various government buildings, financial institutions, and diplomatic facilities throughout London. The palace surveillance had been just one component of a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. Agent Wells briefed Sarah on the latest developments in a secure conference room at MI5 headquarters. Inspector, we've identified the woman Morrison mentioned. Her name is Elena Kozlova, and she's been coordinating surveillance operations at the Treasury Building and the Foreign Office. Sarah studied the surveillance photographs of Kozlova, a professional-looking woman in her 30s who had been working as a translation contractor for government departments. Like Morrison, she had used her legitimate access to install surveillance equipment in sensitive locations. Have we been able to arrest her? She disappeared 2 days ago, Wells replied grimly. We believe she was warned when Petrov failed to check in with his handlers. She's probably already left the country. The escape of key operatives highlighted the sophisticated nature of the espionage network and the challenges of dismantling international intelligence operations. However, the investigation had succeeded in neutralizing the immediate threats and gathering valuable intelligence about foreign surveillance methods. Captain Reynolds provided updates on the palace, security improvements that had been implemented since the discovery of the surveillance devices. Inspector, we've conducted a complete security overhaul, new access protocols, enhanced background screening, and advanced detection equipment throughout the complex. Sarah was pleased with the security improvements, but she knew the real measure of success would be preventing similar breaches in the future. Captain, what about the personnel who were unknowingly manipulated into providing information? David Park and Maria Santos have been retained after extensive interviews and psychological evaluations, Reynolds reported. They were clearly victims of sophisticated manipulation, rather than willing participants in espionage. The handling of Morrison's case had been more complex. His cooperation with the investigation had been substantial, providing crucial information that led to the identification of other operatives and surveillance locations. However, his actions had still constituted serious crimes against national security. Sarah attended Morrison's sentencing hearing, where his defense attorney argued for leniency, based on his cooperation and the financial pressures that led to his recruitment. The judge acknowledged Morrison's assistance to the investigation, while emphasizing the severity of espionage charges. "Thomas Morrison," the judge pronounced, "your cooperation has been valuable to national security, but your actions endangered the safety and privacy of the royal family and potentially compromised sensitive government information. This court sentences you to 8 years imprisonment, reduced from 12 years due to your substantial cooperation with authorities." Morrison accepted the sentence with resignation, understanding that his choices had consequences even though he had been manipulated by professional intelligence operatives. His case served as a reminder of how foreign services exploited personal vulnerabilities to recruit assets in high security environments. Viktor Petrov's case proved more complicated due to his claims of diplomatic immunity. After weeks of legal proceedings and diplomatic negotiations, he was declared persona non grata and expelled from the United Kingdom rather than prosecuted. The expulsion sent a clear message about British intolerance for espionage activities, but Sarah knew Petrov would likely continue his intelligence work in other countries. Dr. Margaret Thornton conducted a comprehensive assessment of the intelligence damage caused by months of surveillance. Her classified report to government officials outlined the potential compromise of diplomatic communications, policy discussions, and personal information about the royal family. Inspector Mitchell, Dr. Thornton informed Sarah during a confidential briefing, "While the surveillance was extensive, we believe we've identified most of the compromised information and taken appropriate measures to mitigate any potential damage." The royal family had been briefed about the investigation and surveillance breach, though many details remained classified for security reasons. Queen Camilla had been informed that suspicious activity in her personal belongings had led to the discovery of a larger espionage operation, and she had expressed gratitude for the thorough investigation and improved security measures. Sarah reflected on the case as she completed her final reports. What had begun as a routine security check of a suspicious item in Queen Camilla's handbag had uncovered an international espionage network that had been operating for months. The investigation had required cooperation between multiple agencies and highlighted the ongoing threats posed by Foreign Intelligence Services Agent. Wells met with Sarah for a final debriefing about the case and its broader implications. "Inspector, your investigation prevented potentially years of continued surveillance and intelligence gathering. The methods we've documented will help us identify similar operations in the future." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she understood that the case represented both success and ongoing challenges. "Agent Wells, what concerns me is how sophisticated these operations have become. Morrison and the others were recruited through carefully targeted approaches that exploited their specific vulnerabilities." "That's exactly why this case has been so valuable," Wells replied. "We've learned about their recruitment methods, technical capabilities, and operational procedures. This intelligence will strengthen our counterintelligence efforts against future operations." The palace had implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from the investigation. Regular sweeps for surveillance equipment, enhanced background investigations, psychological support for staff facing financial difficulties, and improved monitoring of personnel with high-level access were all now standard procedures. Captain Reynolds organized a security briefing for all palace staff to discuss the importance of reporting suspicious approaches or requests for information. The briefing emphasized that foreign intelligence services actively sought to recruit assets in high-security environments and that staff should be vigilant about protecting sensitive information. The recent investigation demonstrated how professional operatives can manipulate good people into compromising security, Reynolds told the assembled staff. "Everyone has a responsibility to protect the royal family and maintain the integrity of palace operations." As Sarah concluded her involvement in the case, she received commendations from both the Metropolitan Police and MI5 for her thorough investigation and professional handling of a sensitive security matter. However, she knew the most important outcome was the prevention of continued surveillance and the strengthening of security protocols to protect against future threats. The case had revealed the constant vigilance required to protect high-value targets from sophisticated intelligence operations Foreign services would continue developing new methods and recruiting new assets, making ongoing security improvements and staff education essential for maintaining effective protection. Sarah returned to her regular duties with the Metropolitan Police, carrying with her valuable experience in counterintelligence work and a deeper appreciation for the complex security challenges facing modern democratic societies. The investigation had been successful, but it also served as a reminder that protecting national security required constant adaptation and vigilance against evolving threats. The suspicious item found in Queen Camilla's purse had led to one of the most significant counterintelligence discoveries in recent years, demonstrating how small security concerns could reveal much larger threats to national security. The investigation's success depended on thorough police work, interagency cooperation, and the courage of individuals who chose to cooperate rather than continue participating in activities that threatened their country's security.